What's going on, Learn Zawadi community? It's your host, Jonathan Pulphus, and I'm glad that you're joining in on us today on this new special presentation on the gift that is Black history, the gift that is Black studies, the gift that is Richard Wright. I want to apologize to those who regularly are watching and supporting the work of Learn Zawadi. Last month was a pretty difficult month. I lost a mentor, Dr. Jonathan Smith, who was a vice president for diversity and inclusion at St. Louis University. And that was just a tough period with everything else going on. And so I'm ready to get the ball back rolling. I'm actually going to catch up. This is actually the Zawadi for June. And so this month we'll be on the lookout for the following gift. I'm going to be another exciting figure in Black history, a dope OG when it comes to just the work of Black freedom, the work of the Black freedom movement. And so you already know the drill. If you've been following us, grab a journal, a dictionary, and something to write with, and we'll get straight to it. So the agenda, we already know this. We're gonna talk about a word bank, go through some activities, get into some biography. Who was Richard Wright? RW. Talk about some major works, his impact today, do a little reflections, cover some sources, and then we're gonna close. On the right-hand side, you got this stellar picture of Mr. Wright, suited and booted in the cut, leaning back towards that shelf of books, very knowledgeable brother. And today we're gonna in part talk about what the outcomes and the results were of his intellectual work, his intellectual prowess. Word bank. So I need you to pause this video, but before you do, grab that journal and your writing instrument. And then at the top of your page, you can write Richard Wright literacy moment. And what's the literacy moment? Of course, the literacy moment is just making sure we are on the same sheet of music when it comes to some of these terms that we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to cover them all, but these are some of the words and some definitions you want to be aware of moving forward. The first one's on the Great Depression. The second piece is on the Communist Party. The third piece is on expatriate. Man. And the fourth is on Loving versus Virginia. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case in '67. So go ahead and check those out. When you get those down on paper, when you get those down in your journal, make sure you go ahead and etch out those definitions and then start the video again. For the activity today, again, go ahead and pause that video, grab that writing instrument, and grab your journal. Underneath literacy moment, you're gonna put these three questions. You're gonna respond to these questions. You're gonna answer these questions. You're gonna put down your ideas and opinions about these three questions in your own imagination. It can be you writing something out or even you drawing something out. The first one is, why would the Black community be appealed by the Communist Party in the early 20th century? We cooking with grease right now. The second question is, how did the Black migration respond to the Great Depression? We just put the bun in the oven. The third one is, who are two Black literary giants that moved to France? And I put a little hint there too. The hint is JB and AD. And so when you respond to these questions, go ahead and start that video again. You can respond to it an artistic or a written response. If you need to, go ahead and go to Google, look at different sources on your own, do your own research. And when you're ready, go ahead and start this video again. So let's get into the biography. R-Dub, with the bow tie and the and the bling on the wrist. He pencil thick and stuff. Got that one finger, that pointer finger on his chin. So who is this brother Wright? So Richard Nathaniel Wright. He was born in 08, right? In September 4th, 1908. Now, if you know anything about history and the development of America and Black movement within America, 1908 is a period in which you got the Civil War, you got Reconstruction. And so following Reconstruction and that deal that the South Dixiecrats made with the Northern Republicans, federal troops were taken out of the South. And so as a result, this led to a vigilante and in part state-sponsored terrorism impacting the Black community, both in the South and in the North. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of Black folk were migrating from the South to the North, not only just to find jobs and opportunity, but to escape the unchecked and vigilantism that's going on with white Southerners against Black folk and a bunch of stuff in between. So in this context, Richard Nathaniel Wright is born. He's born to parents Nathaniel, who his father was a sharecropper. So, he earned his way, salt of the earth, hand to hand. He made things do with his hands. And his mom was a school teacher who was well educated, and when I say well educated, I don't mean just smart or intelligent. I mean in terms of the traditional route of actually having being well read and a lot more other things. So she used that knowledge and that skill set to provide and support her family. Now, Richard was born actually not necessarily in Roxy, Mississippi, but he was born at I think he was born on a plantation in Natchez, Mississippi, which is not too far from Roxy, Mississippi, right? And so he's born in this environment. He's born to these parents who are taking care of him. And his family ends up moving to Memphis, going north to pursue, like I said earlier, some economic opportunity. And so in Memphis, Tennessee, it's a lot of rich history, both in Mississippi and in Memphis. A lot of folk in the north, a lot of Black people to this day in the north have a lot of family in either Memphis, or they have them coming from Mississippi, or they got them coming from Texas. And so Richard is no different in this moment and in this environment. But Richard, like I said, his bird was real smart, right? And his father was hardworking. Both his parents were hardworking. And so naturally that ends up rubbing off on, their seed. And so he ends up, I'm sure, learning a lot from his mom in terms of his ABCs, learning about the importance of the written word, being able to read, write, all those different things to communicate. And he developed his passion for writing. And so tied to that skill set that he develops as someone who can tell stories, and he's also reflecting on all these traumatic things happening around him and all the good things happening as well, in terms of him having a family that cares for him and wants the best for his life and for themselves. But that's also in the midst of this, they had to move, right? It wasn't like they woke up one day in Mississippi and were like, we want to go to Memphis. No, there were actually reasonings for that. It was a safety thing for sure, given the climate, the racial climate that's happening in America at the time. But also, you got to be able to eat still, right? In the midst of all this frustration and all this danger and all this despair, we still got to live on a day-to-day basis. And so he ends up using a lot of this stuff that he's experienced during his upbringing to actually influence a lot of his work. And so at the age of 15, so it's like the early 1920s, maybe late 1910s, early 1920s, he publishes his first piece at age 15. Now that's about like the sophomore, freshman age, for those who are thinking about what it means to be a 15-year-old publishing in a actual, becoming an author at age 15. The first piece he makes is The Voodoo of Hell's Half Acre, and it's published in the Southern Register. So after he gets this out, he already getting, he's no longer wet behind the ears when it comes to the actual publishing world. He moves from Memphis to Chicago at 19. This is about the early to mid 1920s. And so mind you, in this moment, the United States, you got the First World War going on. And like I said, after post-Reconstruction, you're now talking about, the era of Jim Crow. So the South is off the chain. The North is too. And so he goes to Chicago, and he ends up becoming into contact with a legendary giant in the publishing world. And this individual's name is Robert Abbott. Now, Rob was known for this publication called the Abbott Monthly, but he's more known for a larger publication that was like the New York Times of the Midwest, particularly in Chicago, called the Chicago Defender for the Black community. So it wouldn't necessarily be like the New York Times equivalent, because that's more general. But if you know anything, if you're from St. Louis, where I'm from, we have like the St. Louis American, and its main base is the Black community. So the Chicago Defender, talking about 50,000 copies or so many copies a month, a year. So Robert Abbott had founded that to make sure that those in the community could be aware of events happening in surrounding communities, and also just have think pieces and opinion pieces around news happening and issues in the community. And so Robert helps give Richard this platform. He like, Richard, I see you got a lot of potential. I see you were published already at the age of 15, and you're really interested. You have a passion for writing. I know your mom was a school teacher. Your father's hardworking. Why don't you come on and publish for the Abbott Monthly? So he didn't publish for the Chicago Defender. I'm not even too sure. You can fact check me. I'm not even too sure if the Chicago Defender was out at that time. but he did end up publishing for the Abbott Monthly. And so this Abbott Monthly, the piece that he ended up publishing for that, and this was like his first major publication, was Superstition. And that was at the age of 23. This is 8 years after he publishes his first article that was with the Southern Register. So at the age of 29, he ends up moving to New York, and then he gets him a little boo thing. He gets him a wife who ends up becoming his ex-wife, Miss Meadman, and he marries at the age of 31. And so now we're about in late 1930s, early 1940s. It's around this period. And so that relationship, that marriage is short-lived, but he ends up, while he's in New York networking, he's still really interested in his writing. He's picking up little small-time gigs here and there. And he ends up getting the opportunity to actually become a recipient of this fellowship called and I'm gonna butcher the name. I'm gonna call it the Jugheim Fellowship. He ends up using this fellowship. He ends up using this paper, this bread, to end up completing or to work on and to release this work called Native Son. And a lot of people know Native Son, but they don't know too much about R.W. They don't know too much about Richard Wright and his story. But this is actually the funding source that actually, and it's a prestigious fellowship. When you're especially for academics, you hear the word fellowship and you receive it, it's a big deal because you're no longer having to fund your work on your own or have to rely and be scrappy with your funding. You have an endowed, not an endowed, but you have an actual source that can help push your work and make it go out there and help promote it and everything. And so Native Son, we'll talk about that in another slide, but that's like a major piece within the larger project of the Black literary tradition, right? And so James Baldwin, if you know anything about James Baldwin, he critiques it in some more stuff. So like Native Son's a huge piece, right? And so this is at age 32. So, in like I said, the late 1930s, early 1940s. And so we've already had the World War. You got, during this moment, in this context, a lot of racial uprisings happening with Black folk fighting for access and opportunity, equity, and all these different things. So in the midst of this, like I said earlier, Richard was born on a plantation. His father was a sharecropper. And for those who are, again, not so familiar with the way in which Civil War transitioned to Reconstruction, what ends up happening is once you have Juneteenth, once you have all these recognitions that it was now illegal to have enslavement in the way in which it was carried out at the time, what ends up happening is he goes ahead, a lot of folk who were dependent on plantation-based labor for whatever reason now are still dependent on it, right? Because that's the only way they can make ends meet. That's how and I'm not saying that's exactly how his father got into the trade of sharecropping, but it's a thing for a lot of folk in the South at the time. And so Richard Wright, like I said, he's born in the midst of this. He's seeing, the way his father got his, the way his mama got his. He's seeing that he had to be uprooted from his hometown. He had to move to the Midwest, and he in New York. So he's seeing like all different, like a lot, except with the exception of the West. I'm not sure if he went to Cali or anything like that, but he's seeing different areas of the U.S. and the ways in which racism ain't necessarily just a geographical, like a regional issue. It's all over the nation. And so when he publishes Native Son, a lot of those things around race, gender, class, all those things pop out. And so you should check that book out if you can. So before he ends up actually publishing Native Son, he divorced his first wife and ends up marrying Miss Ellen Poplar. And together they have 2 daughters. I believe both of these were white women, which at the time in the North, I'm not sure what the laws were like, but if you research that case, Virginia versus Loving or Loving versus Virginia, it adds an interesting dynamic to Richard's story, given that interracial marriages, they called it miscegenation or whatever the case, when 2 different races of people, individuals from lovers from 2 different races are coming together to create something beautiful or whatever the case whatever you want to call it. Like that was until the 1967 case, it was still left up to states to figure out what that looked like. And so he ends up getting married to Ellen Poplar at age 31. And then he ends up saying, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm gone. Don't pass go, don't collect $200. I'm leaving this. And so he ends up moving from the US to France. He becomes an expatriate, is the term, a French national. And so that's at the age 38. Now, Richard, while he's in France, he ends up still writing. He's what's that word? They call it prolific. He's a prolific writer. Like I read somewhere he wrote like 4,000 haikus. If you don't know what haiku is, it's like really a short poem and whatnot. It's like 4 lines or 3 lines, something like that. But at the end of the day, he was a prolific writer. He was about putting that pen to paper and expressing his thoughts about what was going on in society, but also other things too. He talked about love, he talked about all different kinds of things. So he ends up passing away, and I can't off the top of my mind remember what the COD is, what the cause of death was, but he ends up passing away, unfortunately, November 28th of 1960. I know it was due to natural causes, but he ends up passing away, but he ends up leaving us with some really, really, really valuable gifts. Not necessarily just his publication, but just his story in general. If you dig deeper into it than this presentation allows for, you can peep what I'm talking about. So what were his major works? Well, there's 2 of them, and of course I'm biased whenever I talk about major works. What may be major to one person may be important to another, may not be significant to me. But you cannot, without a doubt, talk about Richard Wright without talking about Native Son. So this is again published in March 1st of 1940, and it's republished in 1940. And all I did is that it's published through Harper and Brothers. So, at the time, Harper and Brothers, I believe, was established like in the 1800s. It's an old flagship American publication institution. And so the fact that he was able by way of that fellowship, which I talked about in the previous slide, through the Jugheim Fellowship, the fact that he was able to make all that happen, make those connections happen, is nothing short of remarkable at that time, right? And so, and it speaks to, his mama's seasoning, as Kwame Brown would say, right? And so he ends up getting that fellowship and uses it to have these connections with Harper and Brothers. He ends up publishing this book called Native Son. Now, the story of Native Son, I'm not gonna get too deep into it because, again, for the purposes of this presentation, it's not for that. But when you read Native Son, it talks about the story of a chauffeur named Bigger Thomas who ends up getting caught up in a bunch of crazy, monstrous activity. However, it is an interesting way in which folk look at what it means to be Black in America, and working within a context in which really you have opportunity that the next mug wouldn't get. So if you know the thing about Native Son, chauffeur Bigger Thomas, he's given an opportunity to chauffeur for this rich white family, and he ends up leaving like his immediate surrounding to have opportunity. And in the midst of him, wrestling with those 2 different words, W.E.B. Du Bois, you look at double consciousness, is when it's kind of like you Black and then you American, and you're American but you Black, and you can never just be American, you can never just be Black. Like a lot of those things and motifs and stuff pop up in this book. And so Bigger Thomas ends up getting caught up because he ends up killing. Well, he didn't kill her. Well, yeah, he ends up killing the daughter of his employer, because he gets afraid that after, and I'm not gonna spoil the whole story, but it's crazy. It's levels to that story. So go ahead and check it out. Point is, Native Son was a hit. Like it sold here, there, and there. And so the story itself was such a hit that even to this day, there are films made about Native Son. And so if you look at this picture on the top right hand in the corner, this brother with the green hair, this low cut and stuff like that, that is the actor Ashton Sanders, who you may know him from Judas and the Black Messiah, that film on Fred Hampton. You should check that out as well. Or even Teen Chiron, like he plays that teenager in Moonlight. So Ashton Sanders actually plays the character of Bigger Thomas. Now, the HBO film adaptation of Native Son isn't necessarily to a T how Richard Wright talks about, like how he writes his story, because it's of course, like the movies, you watch any movie, I don't care what it is, when it's originally a book, what ends up happening is a lot of details for the purposes of the audience, for the purposes of marketing, or whatever the case may be, details are left out. And so the book is better than the movie, I'm sure, but watch the movie too, if you can. And so Native Son, but even outside of the HBO film adaptation, there have been like a lot of remakes of Native Son and a lot of works influenced based on Native Son. So that is definitely a major work. That's definitely a trendsetter. That's definitely a ripple effect because of the work of R. Richard Wright. Next up, we got The Man Who Lived Underground. And this is the story of Fred Daniels, who was framed for the murder of, like, it was a monstrous murder of some white women by police. Now, as I stated, one of the things, one characteristic or theme with a lot of Black literary folk writers, such as R. such as Richard Wright, was capturing what it meant and some of the dilemmas that Black folk find themselves in, particularly in his case, talking about Black men navigating this world of white supremacy, Black families, Black youth, Black women, Black trans, etc. Like trying to make sense of what it means to have these morals, these values, these principles of a nation, yet the way you treat and enforce it is unfair. And so Fred Daniels is framed for murder. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not gonna get too deep into like the details of the story, but you gotta check it out, right? And so this book wasn't necessarily a major publication in terms of it being backed by a fellowship or such as Native Son, or it being a piece that was actually like, had some kind of flagship publisher behind it. But it did end up later on being included in a larger strip of stories that Richard Wright had published, and that's titled Uncle Tom's Children. You got to check out Uncle Tom's Children. It includes The Man Who Lived Underground. I believe it includes Native Son, but it's also 2 other works that Richard Wright put out. But I'm gonna read this quick, little piece right here at the bottom that comes from, it's an excerpt that comes out of The Man Who Lived Underground. This is a part of the text where Fred Daniels is in the police station, I believe, being questioned by the detectives. And the detectives are using techniques that are unconstitutional, but it's the police. So, they're above the law, of course, right? Or these particular officers were acting like that. And so Richard Wright writes the following. Lawson bared his teeth and bent forward quickly and gave his face a resounding slap with the naked red palm of his hand. A flash of scarlet zipped past his eyes and his entire body leaped with rebellion. His lips felt frozen and numb as they thawed. They began to ache and sting and bleed. Quote, maybe that'll help you to remember, Lawson said. And so this is, again, like the interrogation of Fred Daniels, who was innocent. He was innocent. And even if he wasn't innocent, there's this thing called due process. And even if beyond due process, there's a way in which in this world where we believe in punitive justice, even in the world of punitive justice, there are on paper ways in which punishment is supposed to be carried out. And it doesn't start in an interrogation room. It doesn't start after a trial at the courtroom. There are ways in which the United States criminal punitive system, criminal injustice system is supposed to carry this stuff out. And this book is set place in the 1940s. It is currently 2021. How much has changed? And so it's good to note that with Richard Wright, he talked about a lot of issues that were happening in that moment. But when we look on it today, looking back, we can see how far we've come and how far we've got to go. So check out these 2 works and check out the biography of Richard Wright. Check all that stuff out. It's definitely a gift. So what is his impact today? Speaking of the impact today, it's 3 things. We're gonna highlight 3 things. I'm saying my brother, got the off guard. You know what I'm saying? Got the off guard leaning on the counter. Yeah. So, he liked bow ties a lot. You can tell. I think that's the same pic, the same photo shoot, perhaps. I don't know. Clean cut. It ain't a fade, but got the lining together. Yeah. So Richard Wright reminds us of 3 things. 1, that travel creates exposure, and exposure creates understanding. Like I said earlier, Richard was able to go from Mississippi to Memphis, to Chicago, to New York, and I'm sure he traveled other places, and he ended up in France, right? And so imagine the way in which people have, every space has its own culture, has its own, unwritten rules, has its own art, has its own way of living, has its own people, all these different identities, right? Even though it's all under the umbrella of a country. And so throughout that entire experience, he noticed a thread that was consistent throughout it all, right? And that's that thread of injustice. But he didn't just complain. I mean, he didn't just acknowledge it and name it and actually, wrestle with it that way. He actually decided to put his pen to the paper to talk about and call out a lot of the hypocrisies, a lot of the issues. However, his traveling is what helped inform his work. And so that's important. What am I saying, John? What are you saying, John? If you can hop on a plane, get out of your immediate environment, or go around, go around the corner, do something else. It's a whole world out there. Next piece is dedication, right? So we talk about his passion, his craft, and his truths, right? It's important that you realize that at the age of 15, everybody at that time, at the age of 15, they was thinking about prom, not prom, but like homecoming or whatever 16, 15, 16-year-olds can do. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying necessarily driving at the time, the early 1900s, but he at the age of 15 was like, yeah, I'm gonna go write some stuff. And he ended up getting it published. And then at the age of 19, or was it 19 or 23, when he got published with the Abbott Monthly, with that piece, the author, the founder of the Chicago Defender, like, start early. There's a Chinese proverb that states the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Richard Wright was on that. He was on that. And I thank thank God, for the influence of his parents, the caring guidance of his parents. Like I said, his mom was a school teacher and got him hip on a lot of different things. His father, like I said, hard working, things like that. All of that at once helped create an early drive. It was a tree that was planted early for him, and it ended up developing and launching him into the top of whatever Black academics, Black literary, Black English professionals, professors, whatever want to name when it comes to that line of work in the 1900s. The third thing is documentation. And I put memories are fleeting, but the recorded can be timeless. And that's nothing short of the truth, because the human, we're human, we're not bionic, we're not machines. A machine like a computer or a tablet or even like a piece of paper, you look at that as machine and technology, right? Back in the day, pencils and pens. Like, that stuff is gonna be there. But what happens to us on a day-to-day basis, our memories go from here to here. Stress is all over the place. And then you got work, you got school, you got family, you got all these different things going on. And so the details become less certain. The details become less clear. However, Richard was really good at making sure that he, in his imagination, his literary imagination, as he dreamed about what could be, as he called out what shouldn't be, but also thought about and hoped for something larger, he was very sure to document the way in which he understood and interacted and took in and named and designated his environment, the way in which his people were being treated, some of his own issues, some of his own ills. So it's important that, keep a journal on you. You know what I'm saying? Life is short. And that journal, especially for like family, if you are part of a big family, you have family reunions, or even if you're part of like a small unit, it's important just to track your own experiences and to develop that technique and that skill set of being mindful of the everyday. That's very important. And so those are my three takeaways for Richard Wright. All these things in some way, shape, or form can be seen in society today. With COVID going on right now, a lot of travel is limited. However, folk have been able to use social apps and different ways of communicating with each other. And there's been a grown appreciation for what it means to be able to be mobile and move around. And then when it comes to dedication, even during COVID, once again, a lot of folk have been able to tap into a lot of skill sets or the hobbies and things and whatnot, or projects, businesses or otherwise related or not related, things that have allowed them to focus in on what it means to actually prioritize themselves, their craft, and whatnot. And folks will definitely see the fruits of that in the coming in time. And then lastly, with documentation, like I said, documentation beat conversation. Documentation beat conversation. You can talk all day, but when you actually put it on paper, then it's something that you're able to share with community at a level of detail and illustration, so people can not only see where you're coming from, but hear where you're coming from. R.W. Richard Wright. So in reflection, I want you to go ahead, pause this video, grab your journal, and I want you to answer this prompt. I learned these three things about Richard Wright. If you want to, go ahead and take a picture of your journal. You can email it to zawadi@gmail.com, and then put learn Zawadi and put your initials. Here are some of the sources I considered in making this presentation. This is Zawadi. And I want to give thanks. So, like I said, I appreciate you being patient with me. June was a rough month, but I'm gonna get back on the ball in terms of getting it done. We'll have 12 Zawadis completed within a year's time of starting this project. We're gonna keep it going, keep it rolling. I want to thank all my Patreon and YouTube subscribers and videos, those who have liked stuff on Instagram, all those different places are definitely motivation to keep me going and keep this gift being passed along. I want to give special gratitude to Dr. Eileen Berman, Professor Eileen Berman of St. Louis University, for your continued support and your continued encouragement. And I want to give a special shout out to my bird, my mama, Lolita Zazzaretti. You already know what it is, Mama, Boosie. And I want to take a moment just to lift up the family of Dr. Jonathan Cedric Smith, who I said earlier was that mentor of mine who passed away due to some health issues. He was the VP of Diversity and Inclusion at St. Louis University. Pictured to the right of the screen is my little brother, Christopher Pulphus, embracing and being embraced by Dr. Jonathan Smith at an event at St. Louis University. He's a good brother, good brother. We didn't always agree on everything, but one thing we did agree on was family and, moving the work forward, doing what you can. So to cap off the presentation like we do every time, share the gift. This is about learning Black history, learning Zawadi, learning the gifts that is Black history, Black studies, learn the gifts that was and is Richard Wright. Share this thing, don't be stingy, share it. And I'll see you next time for the next Zawadi. One love.